Our work today is what is one thing you can do this week in class, well, or if you're at home from home, to improve your grade. We are starting a new unit. It's called South Asian States and Dharmic Religions. This is the introduction lesson to that. So let's review. I know you're not at a table, so you're going to have to do this on your own, but what is spatial reorganization and what things can cause it? Hopefully you remember that we spent a little over a week on this topic on spatial organization or reorganization in the beginning of the year. But what can cause us as states or countries or cities or towns to reorganize? What does it look like? Can you give me an example? The discussion we had in class was about Brazil. So if you remember, their capital was originally in Rio de Janeiro, right here on the coast. Beautiful city, lots of history, but it became overcrowded very quickly, right? And their government buildings were spread out across the city. The traffic was horrendous, and it made it really difficult for them to operate as a capital. So they chose to build an entirely new capital in Brasilia right here. And because they moved it to the interior of the country, more centralized, it also allowed for them to design the city exactly how they needed it to be. So their government buildings were like in one district, shopping in another district. That way it was easier to conduct business. They were also able to design it in a way that made traffic flow easier. They could account for all the people that would be moving there, etc. So that is an example of spatial reorganization. We're going to look at Tampa. Tampa is an older city, right? This map is from 1912. So I want you to look at a couple parts of this map. So this right here is the Hillsborough River. So if you're familiar with that, that's that. And I want you specifically to look, okay, this is all water, right? There's a grassy island. There's some stuff down here. There's a small kind of empty island right here. And then there's this weird like lightning strike shaped island, right? If we look at a more updated copy, and this is still a couple decades old, I believe, this is that same Hillsborough River. So that's right here. So this entrance to the river is what is right here. And that grassy island is no longer there, right? We see there's something bigger in that area. In the initial photograph, you could see that the lines were laid out, or the streets were laid out very organized, right? Perpendicular and parallel to each other. Here, they're a little more difficult to see just because the trees have gotten older, so the streets are harder to recognize, right? Here's a more updated version of the map. So what you see now is where there was kind of nothing before, just some grassy areas. There are now man-made residential neighborhood, Davis Islands, if you're familiar. Right. This area right here, now my map's starting to look like a bunch of scribbles. That was kind of empty, is what's right here. And then this lightning strike shaped thing is what ended up becoming what basically where we do a lot of the commercial ports, like where the larger ships come in, industrial type things, right? So that's just to show you the spatial reorganization that even Tampa does. And you can imagine that this is just one part of Tampa, but all over Tampa as we grew as a city, as our population grew, as we modernized and urbanized, right? So now I want you to look at source one. I will try to pronounce his name, but let's be realistic. I can't say it. Map of Mahajahanapada. Close enough. In 500 BCE. So take a moment, pause this video, jot down your initial observations and what you think is the answer to the question in the source one box. Source two is a map of the South Asian political boundaries around the 5th century CE, so about 1,000 years later. Again, pause the video and jot down your initial observations and what you think is the answer to the question in the box. All right. I want to go over this one just a little bit. So I'm going to go actually to the next slide. So this puts the two side by side. If you look at source one, the older map, where we're looking at about 500 BCE, so before the year zero, there are a lot of states that are colors different, I can't speak, I guess, that are represented by different colors, right? So there's one here, this one here, this one here, right? All these larger areas, And what's weird is that, in the center of the circle, they're a little bit darker, but as they spread out, they get lighter. When you move to source 2 about 1,000 years later, all of those smaller states have now been swallowed up by these two larger states. So we have the Guptas and the Vakatakas. So the yellow is the core region. So what do you think core region means, right? And what's the difference between this core region and then it says this darker yellow line on the key is the outer boundary, right? So there's one up here. I'm a very good artist. And then there's one right here. So everything in that area is part of the Gupta region, but the things that are shaded in like a yellow are the core region. What do you think that difference is, right? So the core region is going to reflect your more urbanized, centralized population. They have probably administrations, meaning like governments there, like small cities or towns there. They're more enforced, more organized, right? Where the places that are within the outer boundary but not in the core. So for example, this is in the outer boundary of the Gupta region but not in this core part. Those are less organized, right? Maybe the government isn't as controlling in those areas. It's very rural. Maybe the people are very spread out. There's not a lot of cities, that type of thing. Okay, and then the same for the Vakatakas. So anything that's in the pink, very organized, urbanized. Anything that's in this red boundary, but not like in here, but not in the pink, is probably more rural and less part of the state, right? Make sure as you go through your worksheet, you answer the questions using these slides. Pause to get up, I think, until the last one. All right, so the climate map. So I left source 1 and 2 here for you to look at, but we're going to look, and if you haven't caught on by now, South Asia is basically talking about India. But if we look for let's look at the Guptas. So the Guptas kind of goes in this region, right? The core, anyway. So it's a lot of light green, humid, subtropical. It's a little bit of orange. It's a little bit of red, right? So it might make sense to us why this area is more organized when over here where it's all red and orange, where it's warm desert climate, warm semi-arid climate, might be harder to live in, right? And that's what the question's asking about. The Vakataka is similar. It's in this area. So you have tropical savanna climate, and then you also have the warm semi-arid climate, right? So take a look at that to answer the last question. I also wanted to give you guys an idea of what their vegetation looks like. So if you look, I'm showing you this map of vegetation. So the Vakatakas, for example, in this area is going to be savanna grassland and woodland savanna. Up north in the Guptas, you have several areas of vegetation. So you have a little monsoon rainforest, you have a little lowland forest, a little temperate forest, and so on, right? The reason I'm showing you both is because you are going to create a map. So do this the best you can on your computer. It doesn't need to be perfect. You can use Paint, you can use your phone, you can be creative with it, use PowerPoint. Or if you have a printer, you're more than welcome to print it out and draw however it's easiest for you. But you're going to complete the directions on the bottom. That's talking about these, right? Everyone's going to do the empire borders. The outer boundaries trace for you. You just have to trace over it with a color and make it match the key. So let's say, oh, the outer boundary of the Gupta Empire, this is terrible tracing, is purple. Then down here on the outer boundary of the Gupta Empire, right here, there's a line. You're going to make that purple, right? Make it match. You'll locate and draw the core regions and make it match the key. So you're going to do the core regions on your own. So let's say, okay, well, I think that it's over here. That's really bad. Hopefully yours looks better. And then you would color in the core region in the box to make it match the color you chose, right? And then for the vegetation or climate, you're just going to choose one of those maps. And you're going to add that up here, right? So like, oh, okay, I colored, this climate, let's say, is semi-arid something. Draw it to match the color, and then you fill it in. This is very hard to do. Semi-arid, and I'm just making this up, right? But you're going to match. So you can pick tropical, or you can pick vegetation or climate. So make sure you just fill out this legend and this legend. And that's it. Bye.